What's up, everybody? Welcome into the very first player primer presented by Front Yard Fantasy. I'm going to be your host, Jay Felicio. You can find me on Twitter at GMenJ. This is going to be a video series that I do where we get people from across the fantasy community. We're going to talk about players as drafts are starting to kick up into we're full redraft season now. So once August hits, we're getting close to football. So we got to talk about some players. First guy with me is somebody you see every Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Fantasy Football Game Show right here on this network. Speaking of which, make sure you subscribe to Front Yard Fantasy on YouTube. It's on Twitter, on Twitch, anywhere, all your socials other than Facebook, because let's be honest, who uses Facebook? But you can find him on Twitter at FYFJosh. Josh, thanks for joining me for this.
Oh, thank you for the introduction, Jay. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. I appreciate inviting me on to talk about Joe Mixon. I'm excited to talk about him, man.
Joe Mixon, I'll tell you what, I knew I wanted to make Joe Mixon the very first player because he is such a divisive player, especially on fantasy Twitter, but just in fantasy football in general. You know, he's had his highs, he's had his lows. People have been burned by him, so we all know. People just love to, there's generally not somebody who's just kind of lukewarm on Joe Mixon. You're either all in or you're all out. So let's start off, tell me how you feel. What do you think about Joe Mixon this upcoming season?
All right, so listen up. I get it. So Joe Mixon, he had a foot injury in week 6 of last season and missed the rest of the year. But when it comes down to it, in those 6 games he played, Joe Mixon averaged 16.6 PPR points per game. And just for some context there, Austin Eckler in 10 games averaged 16.5, less than Joe Mixon. Aaron Jones, who was a top 5 running back last year, averaged 18.5. Josh Jacobs, who was running back 8, averaged 15.4, and Ezekiel at 14.9. And I feel like this injury left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. So I don't know. I feel like he kind of gets this injury prone label and he's not really deserving of that. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And bringing up injury prone too, there's people who are a lot smarter than I am when it comes to injuries and things of that nature, like our friend Steffi Smalls, people who have that medical background when it comes to this type of stuff. And they've said that injury prone doesn't actually exist. And it's something that in the fantasy football community, in sports, players get that label when they're dealing with injuries over multiple years and stuff like that. But just because they've gotten injured, it's not like a concussion. A concussion, if you get one, then you're more likely to get another and get another. That's not the case when it comes to injuries like this. So we've got to get past that injury prone label because that is holding people back from a very good running back who, like you said, last year through 6 games, he was running back 8 on the season. He's proven that he can be a running back 1. In 2018, he finished as the running back 10 in points per game. Granted, 2019, he finished as a running back 17, but that's still a running back 2. That's still solid. So when I'm looking at somebody like Joe Mixon, who's going as the running back 13 off the board, you're looking at somebody who you're getting as your running back 2, who has that top 5. If things break right, he potentially could be the running back 1. Now, granted, I know that would have to be a perfect scenario, but let's be honest. Yeah. Whoever finishes as the running back 1 is going to have that perfect scenario.
Absolutely. And I feel like the bad taste was in everyone's mouth because reports kept coming out that he was probably going to return. A lot of fantasy owners, including myself, thought he was going to come back. So I actually remember I made a trade last season where I was kind of already in the playoffs and I thought he would be a perfect person for my playoff run. Hey, listen up. I still won that championship. But I made a trade for Joe Mixon. I was disappointed, so I get it. I understand why people were disappointed. But it is not fair. Like you were saying, to label him as injury prone. Sure, he missed 10 games last season, but he only missed 4 games in the 3 seasons prior to that. So Mixon played 16 full games in 2019, and then the Bengals followed up that 2019 season by giving him a $48 million contract extension. So obviously the Bengals believe in his ability to be a workhorse running back, right?
Yep. And the thing is, everybody keeps talking about the situation that he's in because the offensive line isn't good and they really didn't do a whole lot. They took Jamar Chase in the first round instead of taking Sewell. But you know what? I like his situation. There's plenty of fantasy running backs that have produced with bad offensive lines. Look at Saquon Barkley his rookie year. There's a couple things that I look for in my fantasy running backs, and he's got the backfield to himself with Gio Bernard gone. and he's going to get the targets. They started throwing to him more already last year. Gio Bernard's gone. What are the names that who are the backs in this backfield? Anyways, I mean, Chris Evans. I mean, we talk about Captain America. We've got was it Samaje Perine?
Travion Williams.
Right.
Yeah. Those are the guys behind
you see these guys spelling Joe Mixon, but the way that they've built this offense, it's obvious that they want him to be the workhorse, and it's going to be a good offense. It's going to be a bad defense. Everybody's saying, oh, well, he's not going to get as many targets because they have all those wide receivers. Well, I don't think that's going to be the case because they're going to have to dump off the ball some. And, with those 3 wide receivers, they're not going to be able to stack the box against them. So that's just one more thing that is a positive for Joe Mixon.
I do not think you can underestimate the fact that they released Giovanni Bernard. I fully expect Joe Mixon to have at least 50 catches this upcoming season out. I mean, unless he gets injured, but hey, injury prone's not a thing. We're not going to project the injury,
exactly.
Right? And also, I think we have to realize just how young Joe Mixon still is. When he came into the NFL, he was a young guy. He just turned 25 in July. And just to give you a comparison, Najee Harris is a year and a half younger than him and hasn't even played a snap in the NFL yet. And there's reports coming out that Joe Mixon is in the best shape of his career. And honestly, I would make the argument that this could be the best situation of his career as well. So
yeah, 100%. Well, we've talked about the positive, and there is some downside as well. So what do you think if let's say worst case scenario, they do get the other backs more involved? What are we looking at for a floor for Joe Mixon?
Yeah, exactly. So sure, it appears that Joe Mixon will be the 3-down back for the Bengals next season, but maybe they don't want him on the field all the time. Maybe the Bengals want to try to keep him healthy and he's in some sort of timeshare. Now, if that's the case, which I don't expect, it does severely limit his ceiling. He would have to be super efficient, some kind of like an Aaron Jones season from the last couple of years to end up being a top 10 back, which is still very possible. Don't get me wrong, but I would be less excited about Mixon's outlook if that were the case. However, we just talked about it. Look at the depth chart. No one really scares me out of those guys. And Joe Mixon just so much more talented than all of them. They need him on the field. They need him.
Well, 100%. I think he's being drafted as his floor. According to Fantasy Pros ADP, he's going as the 30th player off the board, the 13th running back. I don't see any scenario without him winding up, a severe injury that he does not finish as a running back too. That's what you're drafting him as. And to be able to get that type of guy with that talent, this situation, give me that all day, every day. Like I'm, Joe Burrow could get hurt again, or like we talked about, the other running backs get more involved than we thought. But even if that's the case, I feel like you're playing with house money. Like it's built into his cost already.
And then you already mentioned the upside earlier. I mean, yeah, he's got that running back 2 floor, but then he's got top 5 upside. He could be the running back 1 if everything goes the right way, if he gets all those catches, which I expect a serious uptick in those catches.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I guess the offense does look improved for the most part, but sure. What if the Bengals aren't good, right? What if they can't move the ball? They play in a division with very good defenses. Now, That's concerning, right? But when it comes down to it, I just think that could lead to even more pass catching upside for him. If, teams are playing more and they're playing the wide receivers well, it's going to lead to more catches, I think, for him. So,
well, garbage time count. Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but garbage time points count just the same. So even if they are terrible and they're getting blown out, like you said, they're going to have to play hurry up offense at the end, try to score some points. Look at Blake Bortles and Allen Robinson in Jacksonville. A couple of years ago, they were awful. And usually Blake Bortles would go into the fourth quarter with like -2 points. And then those garbage time points,
somehow he did it.
They still count. So I think you're really at his ADP. You cannot go wrong with drafting Joe Mixon.
Seriously. And are there things to be worried about? Yes. But you aren't spending a first-round draft pick on this guy.
Right.
You could get him. You're getting him in the 3rd round of most drafts. And I just think it's a super safe pick with a lot of upside. Let's go. Joe Mixon all day.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm going to do at the end of each of these videos, we're going to do a little bit of an A game. And basically, I'm going to use the Fantasy Pros ADP. We're going to go with the 3 players being drafted above him, the 3 players drafting below him. And just we'll say, so there's some actionable advice that if you're on the clock and these guys are there, you have some options. I will start with the player who is the 10th running back off the board, 13th overall, Austin Eckler. So Josh, Eckler, Joe Mixon.
This one's actually extremely tough for me. When it comes down to it, I do not want Austin Eckler as my running back one. Listen, I understand he's going to get so many catches this year. He's a pass catching specialist, but when it comes to the carries, I don't know if he can handle a full workload. So I probably won't have a ton of Austin Eckler on my teams, but if he were to fall into the middle of the second round, right next to Joe Mixon, and he's maybe my second run, I'm probably drafting Austin Eckler ahead of Joe Mixon when it comes down to it. But that's a really close one. That's kind of where I draw the line.
Yep, I completely agree with you. I think it all matters where you're getting them. Drafting Austin Eckler at 12th overall, like you're having to, 13th overall, like everything you're drafting him at his ceiling. I don't see that ceiling of him being a top 5, potential RB1 overall. That scares me. It really scares me taking him there. If I could get him as my running back too, I'm all for it. Both guys on the board, Joe Mixon or Austin Eckler, I'm taking Austin Eckler. But the draft cost, Austin Eckler at 13, Joe Mixon at 21. Give me Joe Mixon at 21 all day.
All day. So I'm right there with you, Jay.
Next player we're talking about is Najee Harris. He's the 11th running back off the board, going 15th overall. So what would you go with? Would you go with the rookie Najee Harris, or would you go with Joe Mixon?
I'm going Joe Mixon here. I get the projection for Najee Harris. I get that he's going to get a lot of touches, but the Steelers, they couldn't run the ball very well last year. I think they're going to be improved in that regard. But when it comes down to, I'm taking Joe Mixon here. I expect him to get more catches. I expect Joe Mixon to be more efficient. I'd rather have Joe Mixon on my team.
This one I'm going to differ than you. I would go Najee Harris. I'd be perfectly fine with either one, but I am all aboard the Najee train. I think he is going to be a beast this year when it comes to fantasy. They, like you said, they couldn't run the ball last year, but I think that's why they spent the draft capital to get him. Big Ben is getting older. Yeah, he can still sling it, but not quite like he used to. So I expect them to use him in a Le'Veon Bell type role where he's going to get a lot of dump off passes. He's going to get the red zone work. He's going to be used a lot. So I would, if I was on the clock, I would go Najee over Mixon, but just not by much.
Yeah, they're close. They're close regardless.
The next guy above him would be Antonio Gibson, running back 12 overall, 17th overall.
I am still going Mixon here. I trust him. I believe it or not, I actually trust the Bengals offense a little bit more than the Washington football team. I know that might be controversial.
I have some hesitations with the Washington offense. I know everybody's all over Fitzpatrick, but anytime he's had to be the starter for a long period of time and he's had any sort of expectations, he's fell flat on his face. He's been Fitz-tragic just as much as he's been Fitz-magic. So,
and he's a gunslinger when it comes down to it too.
Right.
So I mean,
exactly. So I can understand that.
Gibson's highly talented, but I'm going Mixon there.
Yeah, I'm going to go Mixon there too, and that's another one too that you saw You've seen Joe Mixon do it in the offense that he's already in. Mm-hmm. Antonio Gibson, we don't know what this offense is going to look like. They added Curtis Samuel, so that could potentially take away some touches out of the backfield and some targets as well. What's his name? Not J.K. Dobbins. J.D. McKissick was involved last year a lot, and he's still there. So we don't know what Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to look like as the quarterback of this team. So those two situations, give me the guy who you've seen it versus we don't know exactly what this offense is going to look like.
Yeah, exactly.
So going right after him as running back 14, 24th overall is CEH.
I'm a big CEH fan. If there's two like running backs that are going, in certain spots that I am just a huge fan of, you could call them my guys. I don't know. I love Joe Mixon. I love CEH, but I'm taking Joe Mixon above CEH all day.
This one is really tough for me because I'm big in on CEH too.
We're in the same boat here.
Yeah, I know. People, he's another one too that people got in a bad taste of their mouth because they drafted him as a ceiling last year. I mean, in some dynasty leagues, he literally was going 101 overall. That is just insane. The key to fantasy is drafting for value. You get guys at a value that can take that next step up to the next tier. Like, who was it? Heath Cummings that was on the Fantasy Football Game Show said that a breakout is to him, a guy that you draft in one tier, it can jump up another tier or two tiers. And so people were drafting CEH at his ceiling last year. I think he's turned into a value this year. I would love CEH. If I can get Joe Mixon, CEH, those type of guys is my RB2. Those offenses they're tied into. Man, this is really tough.
CH's offense is a lot better. We're not going to disagree there, right?
Yeah, I think I still would go Joe Mixon, but I would not be surprised if I was on the clock and I went CEH. So it's really a coin toss for me. It's really close for me, but I do lean Joe Mixon slightly.
Mind changes every day kind of deal.
Yeah, like you could ask me that in 10 minutes and I might say CEH. So. Next one is DeAndre Swift, running back 15 overall, 28th overall in draft. Who would you go with?
Yeah, it's just that Detroit offense scares the hell out of me. And when it comes down to it, I was such a Swift fan last year. Like coming into the NFL draft, he was my favorite running back. But it's got to be Mixon here for me too.
Yeah, I'm going to go Mixon. I do like DeAndre Swift. I feel like he's a super value there. It's the 15th running back off the board. A lot of people are down on the Detroit offense, which rightfully so, but they don't have playmakers. So I think this offense is going to run through DeAndre Swift and it's going to run through TJ Hawkinson. So I think he's another guy that there's going to be a lot of opportunity. And they did take Sewell. So their offensive line has improved even more. So I'm excited for DeAndre Swift. I think he's a good value, but I still would take Mixon.
Yeah.
And the very last one, running back 16 off the board, 30th overall, David Montgomery.
Hey, David Montgomery, people are sleeping on him, but Joe Mixon.
I'm sleeping on David Montgomery. I'm not a David Montgomery guy.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. There's too many, too many red flags for me. The soft schedule down the stretch. This is another offense that they're getting maybe not one, but two new. Well, it's going to happen if they play Andy Dalton. There's going to be two different quarterbacks under center.
Yeah.
You still got Allen Robinson.
Andy Dalton's
there.
not starting the whole year,
right? And Damian Williams, they signed him for a reason. I think it's more because Cohen isn't going to be ready, but he had this backfield all to himself when he went off last year. So would I take David Montgomery as my running back too? Yeah, but I don't think he's got that upside despite his stretch down his finish down the stretch last season where he was a monster. I don't see it happening again. So
a monster
I would go
against poor defenses though.
Exactly.
And if you guys couldn't tell, I think we're both Mixon fans, it seems like.
Yeah. So, this it's not always going to work out this way, but we both do like Joe Mixon. Hopefully this gives everybody a little bit of a taste of where we're at with him, where we value him. I think he's a great value. I think he's going to be on a lot of championship teams, especially if you could get him as your running back too. So that's going to be pretty much it for this. Thank you for tuning in to the very first player primer. Josh, thank you for hopping in. We will have more of these coming out. Make sure you subscribe to the Front Yard Fantasy YouTube channel. You can find Josh at FYFJosh. You can find me at GMenJ. We'll see you guys. Be well.
Trading makes fantasy fun.
There it is.